Hello. He's live. Oh. No. Are you playing? Are you playing? Oh, look now.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah. Didn't there used to be a program on the telly called The Singing Detective? Well, I'm the singing vicar. Okay. It's good to see everybody here today that's come out to this Police Community Engagement Forum, which has been organised by in conjunction with the Better Together team and the Community Legitimacy panel. And I'm not sure what your expectations are, but I'm glad to see you here and your smiling faces. And as we come together, I hope that this will be a time of purpose and meaningful movement. Anybody agree? Good. So that was one or two. Anybody else agree? Good. I'm pleased to hear that. So I'm Pastor Charles. I'm the pastor here at the Church of God of Prophecy. Any of our members here, just wave your hand. Oh, look, wait. Oh, someone just remembered they remember. Okay. It's good to have you here. And whilst we're here to speak about, serious topics, you can probably gather already I'm quite jovial, right? And that's who I am. But I hope that tonight we will be transparent and free to speak. Because, to use a phrase from the Bible, the truth sets you free. So when we speak truth, then we can move forward. So let's hope that that's what can happen tonight. So I just want to say a big thank you to all of our police officers, commissioner, and all the, where are they? There they are at the back. Inspectors and everyone that has come today in a joint effort to help our community be better. Does anybody want that? Right. I've been told I've got 2 minutes, so I better get off before I say too much. But there are a couple of things that I need to say. I've already explained, for those of you that came late, the toilets are to my right, the ladies, and to my left, the gents. Teas and coffees and water and biscuits and cake are around the back should you need them. Tonight is being live streamed. So welcome to those on watching online. If you don't want to be on the live stream, you don't want your face to appear on the live stream because you're wanted by the police. Well, if you are, you're in the wrong place tonight. Then please sit towards the back or upstairs if you don't. If you'd like to ask a question during the question time, there will be some runners with microphones. Just indicate by raising your hands. I'll be facilitating that part, so I'll give you some more information then. Also, if you don't want to ask a question because you're shy, there are pieces of paper around you. Carrie, can you just show which one it is, please? And you can write a question, and all questions tonight we will seek to respond to. If not tonight, then at some point. We are limited for time this evening. Testing. That's better. Okay, let me just make sure I haven't forgotten anything. And you'll see information around you as well. On some of the chairs, there's the Police Race Action Plan. We are Better Together, from the Better Together team, from the police. There's information about the Community Legitimacy Panel and the work that it does as well. You can also access this information online. There's also a questionnaire, evaluation questionnaire. So if you can respond to that, it will be helpful in helping us move forward. So we'd appreciate you filling in those questionnaires. Okay, let me just give you a brief outline of what's going to be happening tonight. So first of all, let me say I am not the chairperson of the Community Legitimacy Panel. That's Teddy Burton, and he's been held up in traffic. He's on his way from London. And you know what that can be like sometimes. So he's on his way. He did tell me his arrival ETA was 6:45, which is in 30 seconds. So we expect to see him come through the doors soon. Well, okay. So Teddy was going to give some opening remarks after me. Then we'll have an introduction by Sandra Samuel from the police, Better Together team. And then we'll have Chief Constable Rod Hanson. Where is he? Oh, who will then share with us policing priorities. Then there will be an open question forum, which I will facilitate. And then the best bit, I suppose, that most of you are here for is the Caribbean buffet. Right. That will be at 8 o'clock. And you'll hear the worship team sing again during that time. So thank you. I'm going to take myself off, and I'm going to invite Sandra to come. So we'll carry on until Teddy comes. So if Sandra, just give her a warm hand of welcome as she comes.
Good evening. Welcome, one and all. It's nice to see so many beautiful faces, trying to support communities. I am very, very passionate about communities. I think communities is where we need to be. Communities are heart of the growth of our children, our grandchildren, and for things to flourish. So, let me introduce myself. My name is Sandra Samuel. I am the Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion Manager. What does that mean? I'll tell you in a minute. Now, for us, we lead on the Constabulary Better Together initiative. It says it in the tin. We're better together, hence why we're all here today. It's a team of us. We look at positive action, which is something else we'll talk to you about later on. We look at how we can make the force a more diverse workforce. So for me, diversity, equality, and inclusion is important because there's no point in having a constabulary without authenticity, voices, and for people to be who they want to be. So we look after the 9 protective characteristics, 4 of them that we drive quite a lot. The rest is important, but we believe that race, if you can get race right, you get everything right. Did I hear somebody said yes? Yes. Of course. Because if you get race right, you get everything right because it falls in line. So what we're doing today here and what our aims are is to support communities, to drive it so that we can become a workforce that is fit for all. Our children, somebody said to me one time, why do you want to join policing? Mind you, I was very anti-police, if I may say that. But I said, you know what? I don't want to look through the glass window. I want to be inside where I can make that change. And I look at all my brothers and my sisters in here today and how we're going to make that change. When I open a youth club, my background, youth and community work. So you can see that I love young people, I love community. And when I opened my youth club when I was in Trowbridge, I said to people, the only way you're going to get to young people is through their parents. Because for me, I would not send my child to a youth club unless I meet the youth worker. Because I need to build that trust and confidence. And so what we're saying to you today is that we want your support, we want your help. Because we need to change the mindset of policing. We need to change the demographic. We need to change, we need to bring people in with different thought process. And who best to do that but ourselves? We can talk to our children, our grandchildren. We know that there's a lot of barriers. There's no two way about it. But we can't break it if we stand outside. Because we can challenge while we're inside. And we can challenge in ways that people can listen. And we want people to listen. We want our children to have that change. We want our children to be saying, you know what? Okay, I'm not afraid of police. I want to work with them. I'm hoping that one day my children, my grandchildren rather, my children are too old, they're still anti-police anyway, but I'm still working on them. But my granddaughter wants to work in the dog section. Now to me, that's a bonus. If my 13-year-old granddaughter wants to work in the dog section, then that is a bonus. Now I'll work on the others, and I'll work on my friends' children as well. So please, work with us. Let's change the demographic. Let's change what police is made up of. Because we know that if we don't know somebody in policing, we ain't going to go in there. So somebody one day told me to join police, and here I am. And I never thought I'd ever do that. But I won't turn back now, because I am making a difference. So my challenge to you tonight, how are you going to make that difference? How are you going to change the community that you live in? How can we have a voice? And that's my challenge to you tonight. Now, if you're looking for a job, please come and see me or my team around the back. All right? They're very friendly, very knowledgeable, and they're skilled people. Now, enjoy tonight. Enjoy the food, I must say. All right? I didn't bring a doggy bag, but I hope you bring something to take something home. All right? Okay. Have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm just going to invite Chief Constable Rod just to come at this time. Just cheer him as he comes.
Thank you, Pastor Charles. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much, Pastor Charles, for giving us a beautiful venue. We're very privileged to be here. And thank you very much for giving up your evenings as well to spend some time with us. We hope you find it of use. And we're very keen to hear what's on your mind. And for those of you that might have been involved in the event that we had on the 2nd of December 2021, just before Christmas, lots of issues came out. And we've been working our way through all of those. And we're very happy to talk about what we've done, where we're a bit stuck, and what more we need to do off the back of our conversation this evening. We've got the Commissioner here as well. And a number of my colleagues, our new Deputy Sean West, which I hope you'll get a chance to meet and interact with in due course, and of course a lot of our local command team as well. So just a big thank you from me initially. If you don't know me, I'm Rod Hanson. I have the privilege of being the Chief Constable for Gloucestershire Constabulary, and Teddy told me quite clearly I have 5 minutes. It's 350 seconds. And I've already burned up too many. So he wanted me to cover off these points here. So I don't let Teddy down in his absence, let me please just do that. In effect, you'll see copies of the race action plan. If you haven't already seen it before, then there's plenty of copies here for you to have a look at. But the Legitimacy panel have come up with their own priorities, 9 of them. And although the race action plan is incredibly important and we're working our way through it, what's really important to us is what our local communities say they believe are our priorities. So we very carefully crafted the delivery plan that Sandra has talked about to make sure that front and centre are the 9 priorities, which I know Teddy will talk about when he does arrive. And coupled with that are just a few things that we need to make sure that we deliver on. The first is maintaining, of course, policing by consent, including an input from our scrutiny panels that we have, and particularly focusing on stop and search, hate crime, and the use of force. We want to continue to support the Community Legitimacy panel, and we're very privileged to do so, and anything more that we think we can reasonably do, then we will embrace all of those opportunities. But I also want to say thank you to Robin Agaska, who's here as well, from our independent advisory group. They work very closely together. There's a lot of overlap, and we need to make sure that we harvest as many wise voices as we can to improve the way that we perform. The third point is around ensuring recruitment, and that reflects society, the communities that we police. And we were talking on the radio earlier in the week about a recruitment campaign that started on Monday. And there was a big push with the help of BBC Radio Gloucestershire to promote representation from those who are currently underrepresented. There's lots of things we can talk about here this evening. If you're interested at all in that, we've got some absolute experts in the room to help you. But we push on that point at every opportunity, the latest being on Monday, when I was privileged to have 12 minutes on the radio to push some of these points. And mandatory annual anti-discriminatory and anti-racism CPD training, something that Teddy raised with us a while back, where he said in schools, you may remember when he spoke in December 2021, it's mandatory for teachers to have CPD, continual professional development in safeguarding every year. And his challenge was to us was to make sure that all of our staff have continuing professional mandatory development in race understanding of race-related matters, and generally helping us to become anti-discriminatory. And there's a lot of work underway to make sure that that becomes a reality in the organisation. And I just wanted to finish with a few very quick points before I have to hand the microphone over. Teddy and I were speaking earlier in the week about the importance of continuity of leadership. And it's not always within our gift, but wherever possible. The leaders that we have sat in the room today who care about the community every day need to be here for a long enough period of time to build those relationships and for you to begin to trust them fully. We try not to move them, but occasionally that does happen. But where at all possible, in communities such as this, we need to maintain that continuity. He was also talking about visibility. For those leaders to be out and about patrolling and going in to speak to store owners and shopkeepers and key members of the community on a regular basis, not just ad hoc. So we're working with Jane Probert, who's the head of our local policing command, and also Carl Bourne, who's the new local superintendent for this area, to make sure that we can prove that we're doing that. We've had really vibrant conversations in the organisation about institutional racism, and we're at peace with our understanding of that and the obligations we have to make sure that that changes as soon as possible. And we were very privileged to host this year's, although it was just in last year, because of course we've come into 2023 now, but just towards the end of last year, we hosted the National Black Police Association Conference, and it was international, in that we had representatives from America, Canada, and other locations. And it was an outstanding conference. They were world-class speakers over the course of 2.5 days. And I think we've really set the tone on what support for something as important as that should look like. So we're happy to talk about that and some of the learning that's come from it. I've talked about recruitment, and if anyone's interested, I know Sandra will be very keen to talk with anyone about the reverse mentoring and the buddy scheme that we have for anyone that's at all interested in knowing more about what it might be like to come and work with us. So that's what Teddy, welcome Teddy, that beautiful timing, welcome. Asked me to cover off, so I'm going to stop now so that we don't eat into too much other time. Teddy, do you need a few moments, or are you ready to stand and leap to your feet? Why don't you take a few moments? I'll hand back to Pastor Charles. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Constable. I breathed a deep breath when I saw Teddy walk in. And so Teddy, this handsome young man standing here, is the chair of the Community Legitimacy Panel. I'd just like to ask any other members of the Community Legitimacy Panel just to stand where you are. Okay. So take a good look at their faces. Yeah. And because they're representing you. You may be seated, thank you. They're representing you. So if you do have any concerns, then talk to these people, and then we can raise them appropriately. So, and I'd like to say a big thank you to those that take time out to do that. Teddy, I'm going to ask you to come now, and let's just give him a cheer. He's had a long journey.
Very good evening to everyone, and a hearty welcome to you this evening. Thank you very much for your patience, and please accept my apology for my late arrival. I think you know that at this time of the evening after work, our motorways aren't the easiest places to traverse at this time. So I'm sorry about that. I'd like to thank Pastor and Sister Campbell and the church family here for hosting us this evening. And I would also, again, like to thank you all for showing up to this event this evening. It is quite fitting that we are in a church this evening discussing matters of justice, because historically when we look at the fight for justice, social, racial justice around the world, the church, religious organizations have often been at the forefront of this. And indeed, from the Christian perspective, in the book of Micah 6 verse 8, the scriptures say that God has shown you what is good. And what does he expect in return? that we do justly, that we love mercy, and that we walk humbly with our God. And so I think the church is an appropriate place for us to be this evening talking about justice, mercy, equity, since God himself is a just God. From the perspective of the Community Legitimacy panel, I hope, perhaps the text is not very large for you to read from where you're sitting, but I think we each have a copy on our chairs. Okay, I will just tell you what the history of the panel is briefly. We all, I'm sure, are aware that a couple of years ago, George Floyd was murdered in the United States by a police officer. And I think what Emmett Till was to his generation when that photograph of his mutilated body appeared on the cover of Time magazine, I think George Floyd was to our generation. His murder shocked the conscience of people around the world, including here in the UK, forcing us to reflect on our own policing here. And at that time, myself, the Chief Constable, and Sandra, and others of his leaders had a meeting. And out of that conversation, we explored how the community might be involved to give some reflections on how policing is done in Gloucestershire. Thankfully, out of that, the Community Legitimacy Panel was launched in August of 2020 by the then Police and Crime Commissioner, Mr. Searle, by the Chief Constable, and by 20 or so very committed volunteers from across Gloucestershire. We have lawyers, a magistrate, university professor, people who work for the council. We have a wide range, young people, old people like me, middle-aged people, beautiful people, ugly people like me. So we have the whole range of representation, right, from Gloucestershire's diverse communities. We have representatives from the South Asian community, Jamaican background. We have one person from, I think, Korean heritage. So we have a good representation. Over the last couple of years, we've done a lot of work. We have reviewed things during the height of the pandemic. We looked at how the police was using its powers in relation to the issuance of fixed penalty notices. At the start of it, we realized that if you were black in Gloucestershire at the time, statistically you were about 10 times more likely to get a fixed penalty notice. But through dialogue with the police and a lot of feedback and reflection, we saw those numbers trend downward over the duration. And again, from the commitment of those 20 people or so, the current members whose names are on the screen, and some of who are here tonight and stood up earlier. We work with the police. We've worked with the police on a number of other issues, on use of force. So for example, following George Floyd's murder, again, there was an incident on Barton Street where a gentleman, whilst being arrested, was taken down in a way which was very concerning when we saw the videos, because it appeared an officer was kneeling on his neck. We looked at all the evidence, and it turns out that yes, his knee did make contact with his neck, but from different perspectives, it wasn't on any scale what we saw with George Floyd. But it sparked so much concern that we asked the Constabulary to write to the National Lead on Use of Force to review the training practices about how people are taken down in certain tactics which are used by the police. We have looked at the body-worn video policy in Gloucestershire and given some feedback, and requested of the police that officers should be mandated to switch on their camera when they are dealing with the public in all but very few circumstances. And it turns out that since that policy has been more consistently implemented, some of the very footage which is captured on the cameras, we are now reviewing as part of the role we also play by looking at complaints which have been made by the police. So we fed back into the policy on how the cameras should be used. That was implemented, and the implementation of that policy meant we are now able to use it in another piece of review work we are doing. So we have a sub-panel which looks at complaints which are made against the police and how they are addressed by the police. And we are doing something now which I think is unique to policing across the country. I'm not aware of any other service doing it, where we are going to now have quarterly a whole day spent reviewing complaints against the police. And we are looking at a combination of live cases, by that I mean current cases under investigation, as well as some historical ones which have already been addressed. The idea is we don't just wait until when the police have responded to complainants, but we put a community voice in the process as the investigation is going along, so that a whole range of concerns are taken into account when decisions are made. We don't just go in there randomly. We have received some training on the policing regulations. So I'm giving some examples here of what we do as a panel. And the next step is we have identified 7 key objectives that we want to work with the police on over the next 2 years, so that these things can be measurable, and so that after a fixed period of time we can review the data and see what progress we are making. We have asked for specific officers to be identified who will take responsibility to lead on these things. So we are not just throwing some ideas out there. We want to hold the police to account, and it's a whole range of things. I hope you'll forgive me if I just quickly read through them so you get a sense, and then thank you. And then you can tell us this evening, because I want you to hold the panel to account as well, because we are representing your views, and we want to make sure that what we are saying is what you want us to be saying. So those priorities are that the police should treat black, Asian, and minority ethnic people, the term we now use is the ethnically diverse communities, with respect and with dignity, as is required by the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, the codes of practice around that, and the College of Policing's own code of ethics. That's one. We want, number 2, for the Constabulary to bring to an end the disproportionate use of force towards members of ethnically diverse communities. Number 3, we want the Constabulary to implement a comprehensive training program covering the history of racism in Britain, racism in policing, the trauma experienced by black communities, and possible solutions, including a model of policing with empathy. And this training program, we are saying, should include the lived experiences of people. So voices from the community interacting with trainee officers and other officers about the experience of racism they've had through the police and other areas, and how it has impacted their lives. Number 4, we want the Constabulary to demonstrate a zero tolerance to racism, and this must be demonstrable in all their policies, operational planning, delivery of the operations and the review of them. It must be demonstrable in their disciplinary processes and in any internal promotion and progression practices. And then seems I can't turn pages anymore. Yeah, thank you very much, Chief. Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. You see, that's why I don't mind working with Gloucestershire Constabulary, right? Okay. Okay. Now, I will come back to that in a minute. So number 5, we want the Constabulary to review and amend current internal disciplinary procedures as required to ensure that they are effective and that they deliver efficient and appropriate outcomes. And we want to ensure that when officers transfer from another service into Gloucestershire, that their backgrounds are reviewed to ensure that we are not importing improper conduct into Gloucestershire Constabulary. So we want the police to ensure that their procedures look also into the background of current officers. Not just those who are coming in where you're going through vetting, but looking at the history of the service of the officers taken in from other services. Number 6, we need better service to victims of crime from ethnically diverse communities, including empathetic and timely communication about the progress of investigations, and also the use of accessible language, for example, where the victims are not from, where English is not their first language. And looking at the census data in Gloucester now, we can see what languages are prominent, and the police can publish, say, standard letters in the relevant languages so that we are communicating to victims in a language they understand. So whatever needs to be done to support victims in a better way, and also make sure we take out heavy police jargon out of letters which go to victims and so on. And the 7th is the development of clear data sets which monitor the internal progression of officers and support staff from ethnically diverse communities, and also the extent to which disciplinary processes are used against them when compared to their counterparts from other backgrounds. So I won't bore you anymore, because this evening ought to be primarily about communicating. And also, thank you, I've just been reminded that we are going to consider an 8th objective to make sure that the police show a clear pathway of how they are going to be interacting on an ongoing basis and engaging with the ethnically diverse communities. So those are our key objectives over the next 2 years. I'd like you to tell us this evening if those are your priorities or if there are other things you want us to be having in our review with the police. Now, I'd make this final point. I have been asked a number of times, well, why is such a focus put on race? What about all the other protected characteristics? Well, my answer is that the police need to do all of this at the same time. But with race, we have over 100 years of improper policing of the black community in this country. We can go back to the 1919 race riots across the country, Liverpool, London, Cardiff. We can talk about the Limehouse trials and all that led up to that. We can talk about a whole raft of reports this evening. We know that there's a significant problem of racism linked to policing. Now, that's not just the police. Macpherson did say that racism is across every area of society, but he was asked to look at policing. And the police is unique in this sense. If I go to my doctor and my doctor is racist, they can't put cuffs on me and lock me up in their office. But we have given the police a unique set of powers. And with greater power comes greater accountability. So that's number one. But number two, if the police are going to seriously address the problem of racism in policing, then such a major shift of attitude will be required that change of attitude will also redound to the benefit of everybody else from other minority backgrounds. If you take on a certain empathetic approach, a certain objective, just approach, then it will follow through in every area with whomsoever you're dealing. Think about it this way. It is analogous to the tide coming into the harbor. And when the tide comes in, all the boats in the harbor gets lifted, right? Whether they are big boats or small boats or canoes, when the tide comes in, all boats rise. So if the police take such a major shift of attitude as is required to deal with these things we're talking about, then that attitudinal shift will be shown in other areas as well. So everybody benefits. I hope I'm making sense. Now you're already feeling ready for your dinner, so I'm going to stop talking, okay? All right. I'm just going to show you a quick video summarizing what we do, and then I'm going to hand over to Pastor Charles to go into the question and answer session. Thank you for paying attention. I'll just show you the video, and then it will be over to Pastor Charles. And please, let us this evening challenge the police. Be frank and open and honest about what concerns you, and say the good things if there are good experiences you've had with officers as well. But I really want us to keep our focus on solutions this evening. What do we expect to see done differently so that the next generation will not have the same conversation in 20 years' time? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teddy. If we can, they're just preparing the video for us. So we don't have a lot of time this evening, and we're already running a bit late. So can we be very thorough in what we want to ask, but also very succinct as well, please? Be as thorough as you can, and we want to get the most out of this evening. I think I read that there's a newsletter also that may be being prepared with some of the questions, which will then be shared with the community and the responses as well. So if we don't get to cover everything this evening in terms of the questions, then there will be a newsletter and those questions will be responded to. Okay. we may have to come back to the video. Okay, we're going to go with... We're going to have a question time now. So I'm going to ask the members. Hold on, just take your seats. They're gesturing to me upstairs. Sorry. So we're just going to have the video, and then after that, if we just ask the panel members to come and take their seats, and then we'll move on from there.
The role of the Community Legitimacy Panel is twofold. On the one hand, we scrutinize the work of the police, in particular how they use their powers toward members of Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, which we now describe as our ethnically diverse communities. And so we look at how they use their powers toward ethnically diverse communities on the one hand, and on the other, we try to build relations between the police. So we are trying to do a twofold job, to hold the police to account on one hand and to try to build trust on the other.
The Legitimacy panel meetings are made up of a variety of people from across Gloucestershire. So we have university professors, we have teachers, we have news presenters, we have people who work in local government. The idea is that we have a cross-section of people from across the community who we can work with in order to drive change and to hold accountability.
The Community Legit panel is very vast and productive within Gloucester. It benefits through a series of engagement, a series of challenging perception, challenging our process and where we should be as an organisation.
Effective community, effective neighbourhood policing is predicated on policing by consent. The shorthand version of that is trust. And if we lose that trust and that trust starts to become fragile, then that's very much to our peril and therefore policing is not effective. So what the Community Legitimacy panel brings to us is a better sense of understanding, a shared understanding of community issues and an opportunity for the Constabulary to listen, to pause and understand all the indications where we interact and have engagement with communities and the impact of that so that we can continuously improve. We here at the Gloucestershire Constabulary need the advice of the Community Legitimacy panel. We have a significant and strong ambition on behalf of the Chief Constable and on behalf of our Police and Crime Commissioner, Chris Nelson, to be an anti-discriminatory organisation. And in terms of the landscape that we inherit, in terms of policing our communities, we have much to do.
Over the last 2 years, as a result of the concerns we have been raising and our push to change things from the policy level, we have led these discussions to a point where the police have amended the policy on body-worn cameras so that police officers in Gloucestershire are now mandated to switch on their cameras when they are dealing with the public. At the moment, we are reviewing the policy on strip searching of minors, and we are trying to get a change to that policy to be equivalent to what's happening in Hackney, the trial which is running there. We have reviewed the use of force, and that has led to us requiring the Constabulary to write to the national lead for use of force to review some of the techniques which are used for officer safety training, and that is being taken into account in part of the national review of training. During the COVID pandemic, we continuously reviewed the use of fixed penalty notices, and in particular the disproportionality which was seen in those statistics. In Gloucestershire, you were about 10 times more likely to get one of those penalty notices if you were black compared to our white counterparts. We reviewed that and we gave continual feedback. So there is a number of things going on. We are actually seeing changes, and I'd like to express my gratitude to the leaders of the police locally who are actually taking our concerns on board and are responding. We are having some really intense discussions, and now that we have the National Race Action Plan, which has been published by the police leaders nationally, we are moving to get that implementation locally, as well as to get the implementation of the ideas that the Independent Office of Police Complaints have published around reviewing and improving stop and search. So we are having change. Some of this is happening behind the scenes at a policy level, but eventually will filter down to the officer on the street.
Okay, so that's some of the work that the Community Legitimacy Panel are involved in. So this time it's going to be an open question forum. So if anyone would like to ask a question, then you are free to do so. Also, if you're a bit shy, there are pieces of paper on your seats or to your sides, and you'd like to write a question down, then that's also acceptable. And if you do write a question down, then Carrie or Ati, just indicate to them and they'll come and collect your question. Sorry. Oh, can you just grab a mic? Yes, yes. So also for those of you watching online on the live stream, there is the chat facility. So if you'd like to raise a question in the chat facility, we have somebody monitoring who will pick up those questions as well. So please feel free to do that. Please be kind in your comments. Thank you. So, thank you, Phil. Can I just have one other person coming to you? Can I just have a volunteer just to be a runner with a mic? We've got, sorry. My able assistant. My lovely assistant. Okay, is this our first question?
Yeah.
Just before you do that, we just ask the panel members just to come and take their seats, please. Okay, thank you. If you feel comfortable saying your name, that's fine, but if you don't, then that's fine too. Fire away.
Hello, my name is Shirley. I wanted to ask, why is it sometimes when you need the help of the police and you ask, you're sort of stigmatized, and sometimes if they come into your home, they're not actually telling you the reason why they're there, even though you called them for a certain reason. I help a lot of people who suffer from domestic abuse, and it seems like you're the victim, but the perpetrator is treated totally different, and this is quite widespread in Gloucester and Gloucestershire, and also the police do not support you when it comes to dealing with the court system. So I just wanted to know what is out there.
Yeah. Just before they respond, just can I say to anybody who's asking a question, the wireless speakers can only work from an optimum distance. So if you're going to ask a question, can we just ask you to stand a bit forward, because otherwise those online may not be hearing it properly as well. So if you come past the pillars, the receivers are here, so we want the experience to be good for everybody. Thank you. So I'm not sure who wants to take charge of that question.
I'll stand up if I may. Thank you very much for your question. And without going into the specifics of cases, domestic abuse is one of our core operational priorities. We have a number of them. Everything is important in policing. Nothing's trivial to a victim of crime. But there are certain things that we place very high priority on. Violence and intimidation against women and girls, hate crime, but also domestic abuse. So we do put a lot of effort into making sure that we do the best we can for domestic abuse victims. That doesn't mean to say that we get it right all the time. And if you've got some experiences or you know someone who's really struggling, not for now, but if we can speak to you afterwards, we'd love to try and put that right, because it would never be our intention to do anything other than make them feel believed, trusted, and safe. So just if we can interact with you afterwards, if you're happy to do that, then we'd be delighted. Just more generally, we do have a very defined process and some obligations under law, under the Victims Code of Compliance, to treat victims in a particular way. There are a number of responsibilities. We're audited on those responsibilities, and we're inspected annually by the inspectorate that looks into our, it's a bit like Ofsted really for policing. It's Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, and they also do fire and rescue service, so it's quite a long title. And we have to be compliant in it. And by, I think it's the spring this year, most of that code will become law. And so it will be a legal requirement for us to do that. And we're doing our best to improve how we do that and comply. And with the Commissioner's help, we've also been working at how we can establish a victims hub, where we've got a dedicated group of people who will look to supplement the updates that we give to victims beyond the officer in the case, because they take days off, or they're working nights, or they're not always available. And we want to make sure that there is some continuity and a place for people to go to get updates if they're at all concerned. And just before I do finish, I wonder, Charles, if I have a moment, Kaz, has been working, is a member of our team, and has been working on empathy training, because one of the things that Teddy was talking about is the skill in there's a message and then there's how we do it, and empathy is so important in policing. And I wonder if you could just give us 30 seconds. I know my maths is really bad. I said 5 minutes is 350 seconds. It's not. It's 300. And no one told me that. I found that out myself. So it was just a senior moment, forgive me. But Kaz, could you give us 30 seconds on that, please?
30 seconds on empathy, okay. So when I joined the Constabulary about over a year ago now, just to say I'm the head of the public feedback team, so I'm very interested in feedback from the public, which is why I'm here. You asked me if I would look at empathy training for members of the Constabulary. And when I first looked at the complaints that were coming in, I could see that we were getting a lot of complaints about empathy and lack of compassion. And I thought, gosh, we've got a bit of a problem here. And it wasn't until we started looking and examining thank yous that we were getting, whereby we were looking at how we could learn from our strengths, not just at what we're doing wrong, that I saw we got a lot of thank yous for empathy and compassion too. So what I realised was not that we're necessarily failing institutionally, but that it is very important to the public. So I started inputting. I think I've only got about half an hour of a day's worth of training that I deliver to first point of contact people on communication skills. And half an hour of that is about empathy, and I give sort of tips on empathy, and I won't go into it in details, but there's all kinds of ways that we can build empathy and develop that part of our brain called the anterior insula, if you want to know. It is actually a part you can develop. Part of that is cultural empathy, of course. And I challenged all the people on the course to go out of their comfort zone and experience cultures and communities that they don't normally, because we do tend to live in little bubbles now, especially with social media. We don't often challenge or look at people with different views or cultures. So that's really where I'm coming from. But there are definitely more that could be done, I would say. Is that all right?
Thank you for that responses. Okay. Question here. Oh.
Williams, I would like to know how come can change so much. Walking on the street, I haven't seen a police on the beat. I see more police cars running around and nothing else. But we want to see the police. If you want proper communication, see walking police, that you can have a chat on the road. You know, you talk, you have a joke, and you go your way. What's caused that changes from the days gone? What happened? Not enough money to pay you? Or what? I would like to know that. That's what I want to know.
It's behind you. Thank you very much. It's a very honest question. Thank you. And we would all empathise completely. Just to build on Kaz's training, that we would adore to have more people patrolling the street. I'm not going to try and make any excuses, but I am going to set a little bit of a scene and the context as to why, in my mind, it's not what you would expect it to be. And I don't speak any politics here. I'm not political. I don't want to be. I'm not allowed to be. There are some realities to what we've experienced financially. There is a link to finance. You will know there was a global recession in 2010. Most of the country had to play its part in helping with the economic recovery of the country. We were no different, and quite rightly, we should support that as well. Over that 10-year period, that was about the time that austerity lasted for, we lost about 44,000 police officers. It's the equivalent, the Police Federation of England and Wales would say, of about 11 police forces. Now, for the Constabulary here in Gloucestershire, it was about 350 plus individuals and police staff colleagues as well. So we were shrinking. Now, when we shrink, our operating model has to change. Our priority has to be, as a 999 emergency service, to respond to 999 calls. But of course, we do far more than that. The vast majority of our effort is not related to crime. And yet, if you ask the public, they would say, our expectation of British policing is that you investigate crime and prevent it, don't you? But a lot of it is about missing people, people experiencing mental health episodes with characteristics that they're very vulnerable, road traffic collisions. Even when it snows, people call the police. When the winds are high and trees fall over and they're on a bend in a road, they call the police. So much of our demand is not crime related, but we still have to service that if there's a threat to life. If there's an incident on the motorway, that it might, and let's just say tragically, and I said this on the radio at the start of the week, if somebody jumps off of an overbridge and there's a tragedy at the scene, then we must deal with that. But the secondary consequences of that are that within minutes there's miles of tailbacks, and you will have experienced being stuck in traffic on the motorway. Now, why that's relevant is if it's miles in both directions and it's midwinter, people can get hypothermia. If it's in midsummer, they can get dehydrated. And all of a sudden, we now have two critical incidents. The tragedy at the scene and lots of people trapped in their cars, setting aside they might want to go to the toilet, they might need water, they might need warmth, some might be giving birth and on their way to hospital, some might be on their way for surgery, and some might be petrified about how they're going to collect their children because they're not going to make it. That's a critical incident. None of that is to do with a single crime. So the demand that we face is extensive, and the numbers that we had in the organisation were dropping. This constabulary stood by the concept of neighbourhood policing. Now, it shrank a little bit, but so did response, and so did CID, and so did all the other aspects proportionately. But many forces sacrificed neighbourhood policing to save money to put it into response policing. And we held our nerve, and we retained a strong neighbourhood presence. And what we're experiencing is a climb out of that, a period of time when we shrank. Now, the good news is that there's been an uplift in policing of 20,000. It's very, very welcome, and we are on schedule. We're coming in March of this year. It's the end of a 3-year programme, and we will have recruited successfully, if we stay on track, all 153 extra police officers, most of whom are in the building, working or out on the streets. So we know that for the first time in many, many years, over a decade, our establishment is about 1,300 officers, which is huge compared to where we were mid-austerity, when we were just about 990. So you can imagine how difficult it was to allow ourselves to find the capacity to patrol on the street. So what you're yearning, sir, is what we grew up doing, but we had to adapt because of the demand, the complexity of the demand, and the shrinkage. And we've got great support from the Commissioner in terms of raising our numbers. And we're doing so well with Uplift that there's a chance that we might even be rewarded by the government with an extra 21, plus 4 extras we've already managed to squirrel out of them. So 25 in total on top of the 153. So we're just waiting for confirmation that we might be able to add those to our establishment as well. So as we grow, we're putting those officers back into the places where they belong, and that includes primarily in our neighbourhoods. So hopefully you'll begin to see and feel a little bit more of what you would expect, which is, yes, of course you need to respond in a vehicle, but you can also be on foot, you can be out on patrol with a dog, or even on horseback, and we want to make sure that we've got as much presence as we can. It's not a fully satisfactory answer, but it's my analysis of perhaps why you're feeling the way that you've just described.
Thank you. To try and expedite things, we'll probably try and take 2 or 3 questions at a time. But before we go to your questions, I'm conscious we've got some questions online. So I'm just going to ask Atira if she can share those questions, please.
Question says, are the police aware that their body language lets people know how they're going? Yeah.
If you can say that again for me, please.
Are the police aware that their body language lets people know how they are going to be treated?
Okay. I didn't quite get that last bit. Did anyone hear that? Okay. Any more questions online? Okay, so if one of you can prepare to answer that question, I'm going to go here. Yep. Who else had their hand up? And then we'll come to Gary, and then we'll take some. No. Yeah.
Hello, a couple of questions really. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, my question is around trust and confidence, and you have that as part of your action plan. My concern is about the length of time it's going to take for you to build the trust and confidence. 2022 was an horrific year for me in terms of my relationship with the police. Several things have happened, limited support. And I have to say, I put that down to the colour of my skin. No other thing than the colour of my skin. And there are young women reporting sexual assaults to the police in the town centre, and the perpetrator is there, and the police are telling them to go down to the police station and report it. Okay? Young women of colour. Okay? We've been asked to challenge you, so I'm going to challenge you. So I'd like to know if you know what your officers are out there doing on the beat. Secondary to that, we are being encouraged to report crime. When we report crime, the response is slow. The feeling is that actually the police aren't that bothered. You've asked us to build trust and confidence. We come to you, we don't get the response that we expect. Police drag their heels, perpetrators get away with their crimes. Again, you can only say, is that because I'm black? Okay? And finally, when I'm driving, I would like to be left alone. I'm followed for 2 miles, by a police officer. Stops me because I'm doing 50 and a 60. When asked why, well, usually when somebody's driving like that, it's because it's drink or drugs. But because I can't spell alcohol and I can't smell cannabis, I'll let you go. Okay? Cannabis is not my choice of drug. I don't have a choice of drug. But just because I'm a black person doesn't mean to say that the only choice of drug would be cannabis. It could have been cocaine, heroin, any of the others. But he chose that one. The stereotyping has got to stop. So in terms of the training that you're going to do, I'd like to see you having some conversations with black communities to enable them to show you how you have those conversations with the police. And yes, I'm talking lightly because I am really very annoyed. Okay? And finally, in terms of victims of crime, and you spoke about the inspectorate coming along and asking and talking to you and having those conversations and testing you as to whether or not, you've treated those victims of crimes properly, and indeed you solved some of those crimes. What data are you collecting to be able to share with your inspectorate? Because if you're not collecting data on protected characteristics, I'm not sure the inspectorate is going to be able to assist you and advise you and tell you whether or not you're doing it appropriately.
We'll take Gary's question and then we'll get some responses. And for those of you, I've got a question, just hold on to it for a second, I will come to you.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Gary. I just want to say firstly that I appreciate that modern policing is a very difficult job, especially in today's time. However, looking at your statistics in the booklet, there's a disparity between the amount of stop and search that goes on with black and ethnic groups. I appreciate now you're advising all your officers to wear their body worn and turn it on at the minute they get an interaction. However, the minute that is done, you now become the holders of GDPR, which you're now holders of, and obviously those particular items need to be expressed at the time. I gather you've got to do it in your code of practice at the earliest opportunity, obviously arresting somebody you can't, so you've done it afterwards. But with a stop and search, I think in order to enhance your relationship with people, you are going to stop and search. You need to make things really clear at the outset, the interaction of why people are being stopped. Obviously, there's a lot of suspicion that goes on. Well, suspicion is a feeling. You need to explain the grounds of why you're stopping and searching somebody, not just to say you've got suspicion of something just because they might be black and they might look like they've got some cannabis on them or something like that. There has to be clear indication right from the outset, and open and honest, because every time somebody, I believe, has been talked to, there's always something trying to be tripping up, and those interactions should be kept to a minimum time limit as well. They shouldn't go on for ages and ages and ages, keeping people sort of, detained unnecessarily. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Well, thank you, Gary. We'll take some responses now. The first question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There was one in relation to body language, and non-verbal communication is trained into police recruit training, and it extends beyond just the movement of the body, but also the appearance. So wearing sunglasses, for instance, hat on the top, hat on the back of your head, your jacket unzipped, chewing gum. The distance that people stand in relation to an individual can all be either enhancing or oppressive. And so it is a part of police training, and officers need to learn the art of policing and how to use that effectively. Some are inexperienced and cumbersome, and others border on arrogant and think they know how to do it properly and sometimes inflame situations. But a vast majority of our staff do their best, often in quite confrontational situations. And as soon as it becomes confrontational, of course, it needs to be de-escalated as quickly as possible. And non-verbal communication is probably the quickest route to doing that, along with a wise tongue, as opposed to reaching for handcuffs or spray or a baton. So, please come back to me if I haven't answered any of these questions adequately, but for the benefit of time, that's my initial response, and colleagues might support me or not if needs be. Thank you for your questions, and I'm sorry that you've had disappointing, if not enraging, encounters with us. I'm really saddened to hear that. What I'd like to do is offer you a chance to speak this evening with Emma MacDonald, who's sat just behind you and to the right, who's a senior officer in the area and the community. And if you've got information that you're prepared to share about victims who feel let down, then I'd like us to know who they are, with their permission, and we'll go and visit them. And we'll try and service recover that and do the best we can to make them feel that they can trust us going forward. It's not acceptable for us to refer people who were assaulted on the street to wander into a police station. We should be completely capable of dealing with that adequately on the street or in someone's home, or taking them to a police station to support them. And I'm sorry that's not your lived experience. You talked about reporting crime, and there are multiple ways for us to record crime. It can be over the telephone, it can be via email, it can be through social media, it can be in person. But even though the channel of reporting it might vary, because it's right that we give people choice, the minimum standard of expectation should be the same. So it links to your point about the inspectorate when they come and look at our data. There are very specific requirements in codes of practice now that can be checked against. So what the inspectorate classically do is come and they grab handfuls of data and they'll look for where we should be compliant with the victims code. And they'll check for proof that we have been compliant. So if, for instance, at a very basic level, we should report the crime, they'll look for the crime. If there are multiple crimes in a call to the control room, they'll look for multiple crimes. And if they can't find them, we fail the audit. They'll then look to make sure that the victim's been updated, and if needs be, they'll speak to victims. If needs be, they'll look for actual records on our crime recording system. So they don't take our word for it. Unless we can prove it, they don't believe that it's happened. And they then produce a VSA audit, a victim-centred audit, and they give a national grading on how compliant each force is as they work around the 43 forces. So it's quite a tough audit, and if you'd like to understand more about how involved it is, then please let us know, and we'll gladly explain that to you.
My question was, do you collate protected characteristic data, monitoring data, when people report a crime? So if I, for example, report a crime, I'm not asked the question, am I a black, female, whatever. None of that gets recorded, does it? As a victim of crime.
We do ask for protected characteristics. It's optional for victims of crime to share it.
Okay,
many
that's
do and some
something
don't.
100% new to me, because that's never been asked. But anyway, and the question, and that's why I was asking the question, if you don't collect that data when people report a crime, then you can't share valid and valuable data with your inspectorate. And your inspectorate cannot determine if black people, women, LGBTQ, younger people are being disproportionately affected by crime in this city, and whether they're getting the justice and the process and pathway that is expected from a police force, from their local police force.
In a vast number of our activities, we try our best to collect it. In fact, sat to your right, if you don't know Steph Lawrence, is our hate crime coordinator. Steph, would you give us your understanding rather than hear it from me, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, can you hear me? I'm not very used to these things. We do record victims' characteristics. It is optional. To say so up front can sometimes seem quite abrasive, so it's asked sensitively, and then victims disclose that. You're absolutely right, because it does form a picture. If victims are being let down and there's a pattern forming, that's something that we can look at analytically. It's very, very difficult to report in, and I appreciate what you're saying around other characteristics as well, irrespective of what the crime is. It's really concerning that you said that they're female victims in the town centre being referred to police stations. Some often are closed. That's really concerning, seeing we've got a priority of violence and abuse and intimidation against women and girls, which we're all passionately invested in. It's very, very difficult to get it right all the time, but I can say, as a serving police officer, that there are an awful lot of people that are putting in a huge amount of invested effort into getting it right to victims, because we know what it feels like personally, we know what it feels like to be targeted, we have that empathy inside of us, but some, and it is a few, let us down from time to time. And the most important thing for you is when it happens to report it immediately. Otherwise, historically, it's very, very, very difficult to go back and look into things we need to know about it there and then, and we'll support you in doing that, and that's where Kaz's team will pick that up on the service recovery.
Thank you, Steph. You also talked about wanting to be left alone driving, so you should be. That sounds like utterly inappropriate behaviour. I mean, I can't comment. There will be another version of events, of course, but that requires some investigation, I would have thought. You, of course, shouldn't be stereotyped, and if that's the way that you've been made to feel, then I apologise to you. To my left is Detective Superintendent Al Stenner, who's the head of our professional standards department, and I'd like him to come and have a chat with you afterwards, if we may, because I'd like to explore what you've revealed to us today. And finally, Gary, you talked about stop and search GDPR. Absolutely, we hold a lot of very confidential information, and we need to make sure that we're compliant with the law. And there is a legal requirement under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, which Teddy talked about earlier. It's part of the law, and the codes of practice around stop and search that we have to give the grounds, and a whole series of other details under the Go Wisely mnemonic.
The people engaged in that interaction with the police at that time have the right of the public access order in place, so they can have access to that footage.
Yes.
And that's one of the things I'm trying to get across, because not everything's going to be reviewed on your team, but legally they should know that they can access that footage the minute that they're engaged in that interaction. Stop.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't realise that they are entitled to have.
I agree, Gary. Thank you.
Hello everybody, just picking up on a couple of points. The first one about body language. I sit on the body worn video group with Teddy, and the membership seems to have congregated at the front end. We watch a lot of video, so body language is something that we're acutely aware of. It is often a theme in how incidents play out. So what we do is we give feedback to officers where we see areas for improvement. So it's something we're really, really mindful of. building on the topic of discrimination and stereotyping, that is totally unacceptable. The Chief's asked me to speak with you afterwards. It's really important to me. So it's an open invitation to anyone. I'll be here at the end to speak to people privately, but I do promise you thorough investigations do happen when we are told about incidents, because it's simply not acceptable.
Thank you. I don't know if... Yes, there's a lady here. I don't know if there are any written questions as well. We want to try and capture all the questions. So this lady, and then we'll go to Raphaelia. And then we'll go to Dennis after.
Yeah, it's just on the point of, I've been told to stand up, I'm not showing off. On the point of following, last year when we were at Checkers, I still call it Checkers, I know it's called the Friendship Cafe, but I made the same point, that I was followed from one part of town across all the way to Linden and Podsmead. So if someone is bringing up the same point again this meeting, what's happened in the past year? That's my question. Because I'm not saying that everyone's going to be perfect, but we shouldn't be coming back with the same complaints that we made a year ago.
Hi. I have the same exact question, but onward to that, the most important question I had was, what do the consequences include after an inquiry? And do you feel the consequences are enough to combat and influence change? Because I notice you say that you feed back to the officers, but for me, and what I've seen all across my life, is that money talks. And if that people's livelihoods were a form of a consequence in behaviors that have been dealt with, or issues that have been brought up more and time and again, then I feel like perhaps the consequences or the tap on the hand isn't enough. Feeding back to these officers or letting them know if it's like a 3-time offense. I mean, we've got British football with 3 cards, the yellow card and this sort of stoplight situation. So I feel like this is definitely an area where perhaps the consequence needs to be more, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And the second thing I wanted to ask is, there's so much innovation coming out lately in terms of virtual reality being used, especially in the NHS. You can look at people like Stephanie Hatch, who's working with the NHS workers to establish virtual reality training, because this is the close we'll get to bringing in empathy, in a sense, because other than that, education in this country is such a political thing that just having Black history lessons and such is not enough to give people that real feeling that that people of ethnic backgrounds experience. So I want to know, in terms of this innovation going forward, will you guys be looking towards virtual reality in your training? Because EDI training is great, but it's another tick box thing that you guys have in this country, especially in terms of policy. We all sign paperwork when we start a job about equality and diversity, but yet after we've signed those papers, it's literally just information on a paper. So I think virtual reality training definitely needs to be implemented if you're going to talk about things like empathy with officers that are coming from underrepresented neighborhoods. So, boom, you can have that.
Okay. Yeah. And then if we can take the written one, can I just ask as well, if you mention some jargon, please can we have it clarified, like EDI or something like that, or correct? Not everybody understands some of the terminology that is being used here today, so if somebody mentions that, and if one of the officers can just clarify what it is, please. Thank you.
Just been warned that I'd better make it shorter. I'm going to be Tom. Did you say that? It's okay. First of all, before I get to my question, I'd just like to say I do appreciate the fact that policing is very complex, and you put it quite perfectly. That's why I started with it. And also that one of the things about the policing and the community, I'm glad to see that it's finally decided for us all to work together and for both sides to take some responsibility, because the police are part of the community as well, and there's human just as we are. And so it's a case of, I will be brief, it's saying to each other, help us to help you, because that's the only way we're going to get forward in life. One of the things, this might make me hopefully not unpopular, but some of the things they're saying about crime against females, etc., assault. And I notice that quite often this is done, but don't forget the other sector of society are male. And believe it or not, male gets assaulted a lot, and yes, by female. In my book, people shouldn't assault each other. They should try to calm down, walk away, do all that. Sometimes you can't walk away and you just got to stand. What I'm worried about, though, is the fact that, and this is personal experience and personal observation, is that of the police, do they feel nervous if they should come up on the scene, particularly domestics, in which I don't think most people want to touch anyway, for the reasons I think we all know. But do they worry about the fact that all the people involved in such a situation is of my color? Are they worried about it? Because someone mentioned body language there, and body language I notice is that I wish we weren't here dealing with this. And the other side of the coin was where they automatically seem to have taken the side of the female, despite the fact that the male was the one with the damages done to, to them, and the male, rather than getting engaged with them, was the one who initially phoned the police, and when it was realized that he phoned the police, the others jumped in and said, we better phone the police and put a show on, you know. And to me, as far as I grew up to say, if you're wrong, whoever you are, you're wrong. If you're right, you're right. And I try to go down that neutral path. So I'm worried, as the police, are they worried or concerned about how they approach such a situation where it's people of color that they have got to deal with and decide which is right, which is wrong, which one should be arrested, taken away, etc. And in this case, not necessarily to get the male or the victim to compromise themselves and walk away. I stop it at that. Thank you.
I'm glad you did that, thank you. All I can say, hasn't he got an amazing voice? So no, I'm not going to encourage him. Let's just take a few responses. Yeah, okay, take this one question and then we'll have some responses.
Dennis McKenzie. I'm a victim of assault. I was a painter and decorator, April 2019. Now, when I gave my statement, it was passed over to Birmingham Police, Constabulary or whatever. They took my statement. I told them who another witness, first name. Him and another person restrained this person that was assaulting me, and they made no attempt to contact that witness. 2019, up to now, I've not heard nothing. and I'm just wondering why. I get assaulted, I get abused, get victimized, I report it in the right way. It's transferred to another police constabulary, and then they fail to approach the witness to restrain the perpetrator. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience. I can imagine it's not pleasant having to relive that, even just by saying it. But if we can just take some responses to some of the questions that we've had.
So I'll go first. I'll talk about consequences. So it's a little history of police discipline here. Going to focus on police officers. So we're actually operating in a regulated environment, which means Parliament set the rules that govern our discipline and conduct. So we have a professional standards of behaviour that we have to adhere to. Now, if a member of the public makes a complaint, or we found out something ourselves, we make an assessment of how serious that is. And one of the outcomes of the assessment could be something known as gross misconduct. Now, if we assess something as gross misconduct, an investigation follows. We gather all of the information. Generally in Gloucestershire, we'll engage a barrister to give us advice on what we've got. And if PSD, professional standards, believe a case is made out, we progress to a formal discipline hearing, and we'll convene a hearing. The people who judge on a hearing is somebody called a legally qualified counsel, so someone with a legal qualification. You'll have a police superintendent on the panel, and you'll also have a member of the community. And this hearing is advertised. It's open to the public. Generally, it appears on our Constabulary website, so anyone in this room is welcome to come and watch a hearing in action. There are a number of options or a number of sanctions available at the hearing. The ultimate sanction is dismissal from the service immediately. So if somebody will walk out without a job. Other options available include a final written warning, a warning, or a reduction in rank, or occasionally, quite rarely, an officer could be acquitted. In Gloucestershire, unfortunately, we do have a steady stream of hearings where officers do get dismissed. There's another option. If the evidence is so overwhelming and there could be no argument about it, we have something known as a fast-track hearing process, and the Chief Constable hears the case and he will make the decision, and the idea is to speed the whole process up. And the most recent one of those was only a couple of weeks ago. So case-by-case decisions. Unfortunately, people do lose their jobs. I say unfortunately, some people deserve to lose their jobs, and that's the right outcome. So that's the answer to your question. Dennis, sorry, I forgot your surname. My memory's not so great for remembering the middle question, so hopefully the panel can help. We can speak afterwards, and I can maybe help you find out what has gone wrong there, okay?
I do not wish to see a police who comes to deal with a problem in which I'm related, or anyone for that matter, be afraid to do their job because they have to deal with certain political, let's say, or incorrectness, probably by Parliament, or probably as the social, what was the social norm years ago. You see, I want them to have the confidence to do their job without all that baggage.
Thank you. Could I just say something before you do respond? And I'm supposed to be neutral, but I'm not. But just in response to that, And we want the police to be able to do their job freely. I know it's a very challenging role, but the one thing for me is respect and being treated humanely. And I will say it now, and it's, but recently I've been involved in an incident where I've had to make a complaint to the police. This was a bit ironic, because I'm a member of the Community Legitimacy panel. And I must be fair just to say that most of the officers on the evening behaved very well, except for 2. And what strikes me is, I've heard about consequences, I've just heard what Alistair has said, but I've made the complaint, and 7 categories of the complaint, 6 categories of the complaint, every response was, I'm satisfied with the service that the officer provided. I was there, I don't know if he's here, but my brother was involved in the incident, and I was alarmed because there were armed officers there behaving in a way which were frightening me. And I said to the officer, one officer said to me, and this was talking about empathy, and this was very insensitive, and the officer said, it's irrelevant that we've got guns. He said, it's irrelevant that we've got guns. And it was a minor parking traffic incident, and an armed response unit came. The reality of it is this. Someone said, well, why didn't you tell them you were on the Community Legitimacy panel? Or why didn't you tell them you were a pastor? And I said, no, because I want to experience what everybody else is experiencing. They don't have the privileges that I have in terms of having a door to senior officers. So I was alarmed. I've had a response to my complaint. And I did stop reading because I just thought, what's the point? And if a member of the public who doesn't have the access that I do, I'm not surprised we are where we are. Because the reality of it is, and something that these 2 ladies said, Althea and, sorry, your name? Vanessa. So a year had passed and the issue had been raised, but it's still happening. So the concern for me is, and we have, and I'm no doubt that the intention of everybody here in terms of senior officers is good. But if that doesn't relate to the coalface, where we interact with the police on a day-to-day basis, I'm a pastor, but I'm going to use this terminology, it doesn't mean jack. It doesn't mean anything to anybody. And I'll be honest, when I read the letter, this was how I felt. It feels like it's a tick box exercise. That's what I'm just being real today, because this is the reality of where we are. And if we don't be real of where we are, and something I said earlier, the truth that sets us free. And unless we, and I'll use a word that we use in church, humble ourselves to the fact that maybe we're not doing it right. And this is on both sides. It's not just the police, it's on both sides. If we don't humble ourselves to acknowledge that as much as we contribute to the problem, we need to acknowledge where that is so that solutions can be found. The irony of this was that we planned to have this here today, and then I experienced this incident. My mum's hearing it for the first time, right? Right? And it was on my brother's birthday, and we'd come from a meal, and we decided we wanted to go somewhere, and it was in Barton Street. And there seems to be, for Barton Street, for some reason, people look at Barton Street and High Street, and particularly the areas where black and minority ethnic people live. And the reality of it is this: I'm not going to give up on talking with you at all, because if I do, then what will my children get? So I'm not going to do that. Somebody shared something in a sermon, says, if we stop being light, darkness will surround us. So we have to continue to be light. But we have to do that together. I've now put in an appeal to the IOPC, and ironically the deadline for that was today. So I just wanted, I've experienced this, and I'm disappointed. I'm just sharing how I feel. I'm disappointed at where we've arrived at. But I believe that this opens a chapter for us to address some of those issues that aren't being addressed. Because I'm going to be like a dog with a bone with this. Because it's important that if I, and people like Teddy and other people on the panel, do not fight for the man on the street, then it becomes very, for me, it's like it's a tick box exercise. And I don't have time to waste. And more importantly, my children and their children will be beneficiaries of the work that we do together. Let me just, I'm sorry if I'm hogging the time, but accountability is important, and consequences. And Raphaelia said something very important: money talks. And if consequences do not fit the crime, and we're talking about police officers here, if the consequences do not fit the crime, you will get no confidence from the general public that you're serious about what you're saying. So that's all I'm going to say at the moment. But I didn't want to leave today without saying that, because I feel it's important that we be real about where we're at. I'm happy to talk with anybody on this panel at any time about the complaint, and for you to see my complaint, which you probably have, right? But it's important that if somebody like me who's working on the panel is feeling like this, then what hope is there for people in my community? Sure.
Thank you, Pastor Charles. By way of introduction, my name's Sean West. I'm the Deputy Chief Constable supporting the Chief and the Police and Crime Commissioner, but most importantly, our communities, your communities. Charles, I'm really grateful for you sharing what is a personal experience there for you and your brother, and apologies if it's this evening that your mother's hearing that for the first time. I've personally watched the body-worn video too, and indeed seen the letter that's subsequently gone out to you. So I recognise that you've now rightly sought your right to refer back to the Independent Office Police Conduct, and you and I are going to have breakfast, I think, Monday morning. And I was going to share my personal reflections with you, which are personal, and I'll share those with you on Monday when you and I share some breakfast. Back to Gary's point, there is a GDPR right here in terms of you seeing that body-worn video because you are subject of that footage yourself, and certainly in the interest of transparency, if you and other parties agree, then subsequently we'd be really happy to share that body-worn video footage with a broader audience should you and your family so wish, because we do have the same shared ambition, which is one of making sure that we do earn our legitimacy, We are held accountable ultimately by our communities and, of course, the Commissioner and the Independent Office Police Conduct, but we'd be really willing to share that footage with a broader audience, but I recognise the sensitivities of that with you and your family. So a personal matter for you and family, and perhaps one that you can consider, and then we're at your service. The issue of armed policing is really interesting, isn't it? Because Pastor Charles there refers to how armed response officers were also at the scene. The Chief spoke well in terms of some of the complexity of policing and just some of the sheer demands on policing, and we've moved into very different spaces in addition to the traditional space. So we police our public spaces, we police your homes when you call upon us. We now police this digital space that really has sort of transcended and really revolutionised post-COVID with lockdown and the digital innovation. And therefore there are times when we cannot resource each and every incident, and we let you down on that occasion. And therefore we do have to maximise the very best of all of our range of resources. And in the UK, about 3% of policing is armed policing, about 3%. And typically you'll see them because they're in our communities. They'll have a short pistol here in terms of the Glock, and they'll have other firearms upon which they can reserve the opportunity to draw for that minority of incident and event where they need to deploy with firearms. But broadly, that 3% of policing resource that are armed are only used for armed policing incidents about 6% of the time. So about 6% of their working day, they are deployed with firearms. And we genuinely feel, given the precious resource that we have here in Gloucestershire, to make the best use of it. So for that reason, authorised firearms officers in a non-armed policing deployment role will be part of the community and will come and support local officers, because that's what Emma's team deserve and require. We also think that's what you deserve too. But I think there's the gap here, and the gap is it's a little bit different when you get an armed cop present in front of you for a non-armed policing incident. And I think that's the kind of gap and understanding, and I'd really welcome the Community Legitimacy Panel and the broader community to work with us on that, so that we can start to understand some of the barriers around that and how perhaps we can genuinely make best use of our precious resource, even though they're not deployed with firearms. And that's probably the homework question for us that we'd like to take away and work better, because resource is really precious here. And then the final point really is, as Deputy Chief Constable, I probably have the enforcer arm of the Constabulary. I own the professional standards portfolio, so therefore maintain the standards of professional behaviours. And let's be clear, there is absolutely no place for racism in policing, or indeed in our communities. And tomorrow I celebrate 26 years in policing, and I've had the privilege of working across 9 other forces. This is my 9th and hopefully my last, because Gloucestershire feels like home and it feels a very, very special place. But my previous role was working in serious organised crime, and in there we would use the most intrusive of tactics, taking down some of our serious organised crime criminals that prey upon our most vulnerable. And we use a special source of tactics. Now, I've made it very clear to the Constabulary, with the support of the Chief and the Commissioner, that we will use a similar range of tactics that again are quite pervasive, because there is no place for racism within our communities, and there's no place for racism within our rank and file. So you have my pledge to ensure that, getting back to consequences, we absolutely honour the consequences that you would expect, ultimately up to and including dismissal, because that's what you deserve and that's what we otherwise preside over. So back to your point, Pastor Charles, I'd be really grateful for that conversation on Monday, and perhaps we can consider sharing some of that body-worn video in a transparent way, so that we can make sure that we do continue to be cohesive and grow and learn respectively from each other's mistakes. Thank you.
I did say earlier that we'd be finishing this part at 8 o'clock. We started a bit late. I can hear some bellies rumbling. But we will go until 8:25 with your permission. Is that okay? That's 7 minutes. Yep. Yes, I take it silence means consent.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on some other points that I don't think we've addressed yet. So the same complaint a year later. We try very hard to learn from your bitter experiences, and we feed it into the workforce. It's a big workforce. We have people that transfer in, we have new recruits, we have varying degrees of experience, and yet it happened again to another member of the community. But we'll keep trying to root it out every time it happens. So we need to find out what that was about. So I would encourage you that... Yep. So, and we can absolutely use the telematics in the car. We know what speed they were travelling, we know where they were. So I guess my plea is, if you've got a specific concern, it doesn't just let us have it. Give us what details you have, and we'll do that investigation into it. If it's legitimate, we'll have a conversation and explain it. If it's not, we'll deal with it through the routes that Al Stanner has just been talking about. So we're very happy to pick up on that particular encounter that you've had, and we'll explore that together. The virtual reality training in the NHS, we do use some headsets and virtual reality training for some aspects of our police training, not in the way that you've described, so thank you for sharing it with us, and we'll explore that. We've got some great contacts within the NHS, and we'll take that as an action away, so thank you. Sorry about the abbreviations, EDI, equality, diversity and inclusivity. We shouldn't be lazy and use the phraseology appropriately. Don't forget males, we care about everybody. There is a focus on violence and intimidation against women and girls, because there's a lot of evidence from people much greater than I at research that the volumes, the vulnerability and the impact of offences against women is very significant, and it needs to be treated in a particular way. Does that mean that that would be at the expense of anyone else? No, it doesn't. And if anyone else is a victim of crime, whether they're men or they identify in any way that they choose, they'll be treated with the same degree of interest and respect. Are colleagues worried when they encounter perhaps people with different coloured skin? I can't rule out the fact that there would be degrees of nervousness, there would be degrees of experience. That comes with time. It comes with understanding, empathy, encounter, experience. And we've got a very inexperienced workforce. That increase in resourcing has surged people into the organisation, but many of them have less than 3 years service. Some of our supervisors have less than 3 years service. And they'll be nervous. I would be wrong if I tried to believe that they were all confident. Sometimes they'll feel like walking on eggshells. Sometimes they'll feel like saying the wrong thing. But with your help and the work that the panel have brought, and Teddy's on his feet in our training school, as are other people, making videos for us, helping us to be confident. Even our history of, our celebration of Black History Month, it's designed very specifically to give people a chance to feel at peace with not being worried about the things that they probably are. And over time, we're gradually getting better and the workforce is maturing, but there will still be people nervous. But what we of course want is for them to act with tenacity, to be inquiring, to understand the facts of a case, not necessarily default just to believing the first thing that they're told, and unpick those facts and get to the truth. And on that journey, they should treat everybody with dignity and respect. And then eventually they'll come to the right answer. And even then it might pass to the Crown Prosecution Service, who would give an oversight to make sure that we're not using unnecessary bias. Dennis, Al's picked up on that point. We're sorry that you've been a victim of assault. There is a jurisdiction requirement for us to pass it back to the West Midlands Police in Birmingham. But with Al's help, we'll get to the bottom of that and find out. Okay. We can work with you. We'll find out where it's gone, and we'll do our best to excavate a proper answer for you. And can I also just say, because I wouldn't be doing my own organisation a full service if I didn't say that many, many encounters with many communities and people across the year. And we get something like 200,000 101 call incidents a year, about 90,000 999 calls. It is relentless. And quite often my staff come to work and there's 8 missing people every morning before they start, and there's 40 to 80 logs on the incident log before they get into the car or go out on patrol to try and meet that demand. And there is far more demand than we have people to deal with. So we have to somehow prioritize that. And we do get many, many encounters where people go, I felt valued. Now, the trouble is when they go wrong, it's 1 step forward and 15 back, and we have to stay very vigilant to make sure that we continually raise our standard. And can I also say that 200 officers were injured last year? 200 in Gloucestershire, and that's 200 too many. It's almost an attack on the state. So they do get put in harm's way, they do get injured, and many, many of my colleagues we would collectively be proud of. But what we want to know about are the ones that let us down. So at every opportunity you tell us, and we'll do the very best that we can to root that out. That discipline hearing that Al was talking about was only just a few weeks ago, I think just before Christmas. And because it was an accelerated hearing, it's chaired by the Chief Constable, and I dismissed the officer. And so when we need to, we will. And he was dismissed forthwith, immediately. And we've also removed student officers from training under something called a Regulation 13 notice. If they come to our attention and their values and their behaviour fall below a certain standard, they're gone. That's often not seen by the public, and maybe with the panel's help we can do much more to share some of that without compromising confidentiality or breaching information rules that we shouldn't be doing. I'm conscious that 25 past is coming, so I need to hand the microphone back. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you. If you've not... Can we go to past? Is that all right? 5 more minutes? Yeah.
Yeah, my point is, you said there's like 3% gun police or whatever, armed police. We speak about George Floyd, but September last year, Chris Carver was killed at the hands of police. It was a black male in London, So when the police come to somebody in the community like Pastor Charles, all that goes through our head is not the same as being pulled over. We're constantly revisiting this trauma. We're seeing this. We're constantly seeing police brutality against the black community. We're seeing black people being killed, like I said, September last year. So you have to take that into mind when you're approaching us and dealing with us. And you talk about body language and things like that. My question is, how do you still think you're viewed by the black community? How you're seen? What do you represent for that black community? What do you stand for? Because I don't believe the things that the police are supposed to stand for, the black community sees that. So your presence, whether there is, the human aspect of being nervous and this, that, whatever, but I don't see your presence representing what police should represent for the black community. So I think that's very important for you to work on, is how you're seen, what you stand for, what you represent to this community.
I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that, but...
In terms of knowledge, lived experience, nobody will ever understand what it's like to walk in our shoes unless we reciprocate that. And I say that because my sister, D&I, ED&I, diversity, equality, inclusion, I take it so seriously. I live in Wiltshire. I come to work an hour, 20 minutes, because I believe in what I'm doing. And if it was a tick box exercise, I wouldn't be here. So I'm here to change. And so when we talk about lived experience, I have delivered and run a series of reverse mentoring. I can see reverse mentoring in here within the Constabulary. The next phase is to look at reverse mentoring from the community. Now, how does officer know what we go through and what is in our head, as what you said, Prida? The traumas that we go through. Understanding the impact when we get stopped and searched over and over and over again. When we get followed and you're thinking, there's a blue light behind me. Is it for me or is it for somebody in front of me? You know? So I want to put out there tonight that I'm looking for 10 volunteers from the community to do a reverse mentoring program, community and police. Because I think the only way police will ever understand, I can't say it's there because I work for the police, the only way police will ever understand is unless they walk in our shoe and understand how we feel. So, if you're interested, please see me.
Maybe if I can, just take a moment to share something. And just on that point, I think the valid action here is that we'd love a conversation about what do we do when we've got people who are police officers who, by the way, carry a gun. And there's jobs stacking up with no one to go to them. Do we send them or don't we? Because it's not a firearms job. Now, our thinking is that they're a valuable, paid-for member of the service, paid for by the public. And if there's someone in need, then we'll send them. What we've got to do is be very, very alert to the lived experience of communities that feel petrified by the fact that there's a police officer with a gun, given all the history and all the case studies which make us all weep professionally. And we need to deal with that super sensitively. So we need some more help on that, because now we're striking a balance between meeting demand versus the impact of someone coming into a community to deal with a non-firearms related incident who happens to be carrying a sidearm. And we've got to explore that. But I want to share, if I may, just a point about listening. And where I think we're trying to arrive at is a place where people feel confident to share with us subtleties that we didn't know before. And I'd just like to give you an example. We were discussing in the organisation institutional racism. And there was a lot of initial view that we aren't. I've never seen any, you can imagine the defensiveness by some. And it got to the point after many, many hours with many hundreds of staff, talking through the definition, listening to the lived experiences of our own staff from underrepresented communities and the community, that began to change significantly. And as a result of that, I was in my office one evening and an inspector came with a sealed envelope. And he said, "This is from a black officer on my shift. And it's anonymous, but that officer would like you to read it. And it's a letter that individual is writing to a young member of the black community asking whether or not they should join Gloucestershire Constabulary. And it's the officer's response to that mythical individual." And I read the letter, and it's very moving. And I asked the inspector whether or not the individual would be prepared, and I didn't know whether it was a male, female officer, would want to come forward and talk it through with me in person. He went back and said, "I'll find out, but I'm not going to tell you who it is unless he agrees." And about a week or so later, again I was working into the evening in my office, about to go home, and the officer appeared. And it happens to be a male officer in his 30s, a black officer, who agreed to talk through his lived experiences in the organisation. And that conversation was also very moving. And I wish I could publish the letter, but I agreed with him that we wouldn't. And he said 3 things. He said, "Because you are institutionally racist, and I'm going to tell you why." But he said, "Can I make it clear, though, that I love my job? I love my colleagues. I love working with them. They step in front of danger for me, and I do the same for them. But you are institutionally racist, and I'm going to give you 3 examples." And very quickly, these are the examples. He said, "When you get injured as a police officer, we've got a 7-point plan. We do 7 things when an officer gets injured, and so we should. And we pride ourselves on the fact that we look after our staff really well, because if they don't come to work, we've all got a problem." And he said, there's a female colleague on my team, got injured, kicked in the groin the other day, very painful. And the 7-point plan was kicked in. and she was asked if she needed to go home. She got phoned by 3 individual officers, making sure of different seniority, saying, "Are you okay?" And said, "Do you want any help doing your victim personal impact statement?" He said, "So well done to the Constabulary for the way that we look after our staff." He said, "I'm 6'3". I'm an ex-rugby player, and I've been assaulted 5 times in my career in the last 3.5 years. Joined the Constabulary quite late in life." And he said, "Most of the people that assaulted me wouldn't do it if I wasn't wearing a police uniform. And most of their assaults were pathetic. But they assaulted me because I'm wearing a police uniform, because they think I'm not going to hit them back. And I don't, because that's not what we're supposed to do." He said, "So I've been assaulted, I think it was 5 times, in 3.5 years, and not once did it bother me." He said, "But I've been racially abused 3 times by the public, and I can remember every occasion, the time, the weather, the location, and it hurt like hell. And not once did anyone sit me down and say, 'Do you want to go home? Do you need help with your victim impact assessment?' And phone calls from the colleagues." So he said, that's an injury. So within weeks, because it took a little while to get it through the system, we now have an 8-point plan, which includes hatred. The second thing he said was, isn't it interesting how when we deploy to, and I'll only do 2, Charles, because I'm taking up too much time. He said, "Isn't it interesting, we've got a police national computer."
Could I stop you?
Yeah, of course.
What plan do you have for the victims of police?
So the What the point I'm trying to make, and I'm sorry I'm taking too long to get to it, was that we need to listen. Because even by listening internally, we got information that came to us that's helped to change the way that we police internally and externally. So every time we hear, and it's hard to hear, apologizing for the poor service that you're receiving, then I want to know about it. Because we'll investigate it, try to recover it, and we'll learn and develop accordingly. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is the more we understand each other, the more we listen and then act and be held to account through the Legitimacy panel and through coming here and through other mechanisms that you think are appropriate, then hold us to account to show that we've changed. And I just wanted to finish this point, if I may, because it is relevant to how we interdict hatred in society. There's a police national computer. And so when a police officer is deploying to an incident, we'll do a check on the address, and it might say the individual's violent, they are an escaper, they might be contagious, they might have convictions for assault, domestic abuse, they might be a firearms certificate holder. So they're warning markers that help the officer know how to respond to the incident. And he said, isn't it interesting how there might be information on the system that they're a white supremacist, but you don't tell me. And I'm single crewed going into someone who doesn't like people of my colour. And so we've immediately changed the way that we give information out in relation to officers to keep them safe. Now it's that sort of change, it's that sort of innovation that we want to do when we respond to members of the public's concerns as well. And the only way we're going to do that is to listen and act. So, if we've got gaps in that service provision, and we've heard some tonight, we'll do our very best to put them right, and where it's appropriate, we'll absolutely apologise. We need to do much more of it. So, I hope what I'm trying to get across is we want to be an organisation that's prepared to listen, to take the criticism when it's justified, and to do something different. If we can do it internally, we need to do it externally as well.
Defined by people that don't look like us. So that's to move forward, so that way, from an empathetic point of view, that they get to understand how important their job is and how it impacts people in communities like these. That's where I stand in terms of how you spend the money going forward in terms of your training. Because many times, because you don't have the connection with the youth coming up, you're not in schools. The amount of things that are going on when you're in schools is probably behind a bad situation. So the amount of times that you're able to make good of a situation, it's counterproductive. Much like these meetings when the gun police aren't ever sat in the community meetings. I've spoken about this in the past. Chris, you probably remember this. That a lot of times when we have the community meetings, the gun police aren't sat here, and they're the very ones doing the harassment. So how do they get to really hear if they're only hearing from you how their behavior impacts the community? So I just needed to drive that home. It's so important.
Thank you.
Like, we need to drive that education forward.
I'm very excited to hear about the virtual reality. We'll research it and we'll come and talk to you afterwards to give us some. Thank you. Thank you.
Two sentences. Two sentences.
The problem with no, seriously, this is important. Otherwise, I would have kept my hand up. The thing is, people talk about virtual reality, and that's great. It is a good tool. It can be abused. At the end of the day, this is what I would like everybody here to know, police, the rest of the committee and all that. Virtual reality is not humanity. We're human beings. So whatever you use, just remember at the last point, we're doing it for human beings, not a darn computer.
Valid point. Thank you. The food, I don't want to get burnt. I don't want anybody eating the burnt rice from the bottom of the pot.
Pastor Charles, can I just say one quick thing in response to a lot has been said regarding the armed police, and obviously you mentioned that obviously it's a small percentage, but my thing is that yes, we understand they have to multitask and attend other things, but do they always have to carry their gun if they're attending a non-armed incident?
Yeah.
That's, I think, the issue.
Can I speak with you afterwards? There's a really good reason that's a little bit technical, and then you can by all means share your understanding with me.
Yeah.
I'm conscious food.
Yeah, and I'm conscious that Kaz did ask to say something, so I'm just going to allow Kaz 1 minute, and then this gentleman 1 minute to ask or make a comment.
I just want to say that we really value your feedback, and I'm going to leave these at the back of the room. It just tells you how to make a complaint about the police. I know you probably don't want me to encourage it, but we really do value your feedback. About 40% of the people I speak to giving complaints to the police are retired police officers, and I'd like that to change. I want to hear from you more.
We have to be very quick, please.
Yeah, I was a professional truck driver, and I changed my car and got a battered old Fiat, and I was going to Avonmouth really early in the morning, and three mornings this police car followed me, and on the fourth morning when he did it, I shouldn't have done it. I went round the roundabout and gave him a taste of his own medicine, and I followed him. So I got a reaction. The blue lights came out, the same person, and I got out of my car. Coming up, I got the key, and I was laughing at him. I went towards him, and he pinged down, and he's a bit embarrassed. And he checked me out at my address, and he let me on. And you know what? Cheeky so-and-so, when I changed my job, years later, I was coming home from Brockwood on my bike, looking like a Michelin man, with the yellow, and I didn't realise my coat had gone over the back light, and he pulled me. But sometimes just one person is a bit officious. But I don't think he, obviously because I'm white, he wasn't being racial, but it just takes one person. I know I shouldn't have gone round the roundabout and followed him, give him a taste of his own medicine. But when I got out, I'm a big lad, and he didn't come out to have a word, he just put. I'm totally different.
can never get followed. Just say one person is official. Do it.
So, we need to go. I'm going to pass to Teddy, but just as I pass to Teddy, I'd just like to say that the Community Legitimacy Panel, with regards to armed officers, we will be meeting with them as well. So that's something that will be happening soon. So I'm just going to pass to Teddy to issue a vote of thanks and share some comments. We have run well over. So, Teddy.
Thank you, Pastor Charles. And I just want to say a few words of thanks, but a couple of quick comments as well, though. How do I feel sitting here this evening and listening to all this? Frustrated. Why am I frustrated? Because Pastor Charles shared his experience despite all the work we are doing. Vanessa shared her experience. And do you know, in the last 3 days, I spoke to 2 young women who had a similar experience that Vanessa described a year ago. One of these incidents happened at 2 o'clock in the morning. And it concerns me that a single woman in a car is being followed in a dark area and pulled over by a police officer, even against the context of what happened to Sarah Everard. We didn't even need that to have a concern about these circumstances. So we have to deal with this. And I am persuaded when I speak with senior officers that they are committed to change, but the frustration comes with that not cascading down to the officer on the street who is dealing with people. And so 2 words that keep coming up repeatedly in our conversations with the police are training and accountability. Of course, we have to train our officers. We need to feed back all the concerns that we have. We need to give the best training. But human beings are persuaded by self-interest. When officers behave inappropriately, the moment they are going to cross that line, something must be in their mind that say, if I do this, there will be a consequence to me. And so we need to have swift accountability, and this is something we are pushing hard for with the panel. That's why the objectives we pointed out earlier, we are saying we need timelines. We don't want open-ended commitments. We want to know that in 6 months, our aim is to bring down statistics of use of force by this percentage. This is how we will know we'll do it. We'll have specific things. The concern about armed officers is one that I've raised with DCC West. It's something we're pushing hard on because it concerns me that a kid on a scooter on a pavement should be approached by officers, and then pretty soon you have 5 armed officers on the scene with an 8-year-old girl screaming her eyes out because she thinks her aunt is going to be arrested because she wouldn't hand over the scooter. These things concern me, and it concerns us very deeply for the reasons that Ryder mentioned there. There is a history of trauma here. When a white person sees a police officer coming up to them with a firearm, they perhaps feel reassured. When I see an officer coming to me with a gun, I want to look for the help I can get, right? And I'm thinking about all my legal rights now and every mistake this officer is going to make because I'm going to follow it up if he doesn't kill me at the roadside, right? So now this might sound like I'm exaggerating, but Chief Hansen and others will tell you that I have been involved in some conversations about black history and where all of this comes from. So I'm not suggesting the police are the only reason. This society decided in the 1600s that they were going to profit from the bodies and blood of black people, and that has continued in the structures we have in society today. Racism in Britain today comes from the history of seeing black people as a route to profit and where we were dehumanized in order to excuse that behavior. And as a society, we need to have the kind of conversations which Holland is having right now, where Mark Rutte recently apologized for their role in slavery. We need to have broader conversations than just the police. So I think we also as a community need to start holding our political representatives to account, because the police regulations are themselves limited and the police can do more to hold officers to account within the current regulations. But when you had people like Ms. Patel, who was Home Secretary, undermining even the current regulations by her conduct and comments, what we need is to let our politicians know that we are going to hold them to account, and black people go and register to vote and vote. And let these people know, because in many of the constituencies in this country, if we vote strategically, we determine who goes to parliament. We need to understand our power and use it so that the police regulations can be changed to ensure that Chief Constable Hansen has an easier job to sack bad officers. It's not easy to get rid of a poor police officer, I can tell you that, within the current regulations. So what do we need? New regulations, which empowers the officers who make the decision to get rid of bad officers. How do we change that? Get involved in politics. Let our MP, our local councillors, everybody know that we are going to make racial justice a political issue. And then we will start to get some change. Let the business community know that we're not going to spend our money with them until they have conversations with the political representatives whose campaigns they finance. We're not spending our money in your business until you tell those political representatives to change their conduct in Parliament and represent everybody. Am I making sense here, family? We need to do more than just talking to the police. We need to find the other mechanisms and the levers that we must pull for our own benefit. Because I can tell you this, nowhere in history have oppressors just benevolently one morning get up and say, I'm going to change today. The oppressed people have to stand up and show oppressors that it is in their interest to change, or something is at stake for them as well. Am I making sense? Pastor Charles is going to say amen like I'm preaching a sermon soon, so I'll stop talking now. But I will say this, yes, exactly. I will say this. Later this year, we are going to start having some of our panel meetings in public, so you can come and sit in and observe how we hold the police to account, and you can raise questions among us as well. We will publish that so you can get involved. Please, when we do this, come and support us. We'd be very grateful. Those who still haven't had a chance to ask your questions, please leave them on the chairs on those sheets. We are going to publish a response document to what happened this evening. Our minutes from the panel are published on the police website, and you can access those as well. And please give us feedback. And finally, please come and join us and help us with the work, because it's a lot to do and we need more help. Okay, so please join the Legitimacy panel. But I do want to close by saying a very big thank you to our Police and Crime Commissioner Nelson. Yes, and Sandra wants to recruit more of us into the police, right? But I'm telling the police as well, it's not just about recruitment. Change the culture inside so that when you invest and recruit people, they will stay and be retained and be progressed through the ranks, so that 30 years down the road, they don't start as constable and end as constable, right? We need to have a fair shot at getting promoted as well. So it's about changing the culture whilst at the same time opening the doors. And I know that we're agreed on that, right, Sandra? All right, good. So please, I'd like to say a very big thanks to Commissioner Nelson, to Chief Constable Hanson, to Deputy Chief Constable West, to all the senior officers and police staff who are here, our police constables and the PCSOs who are supporting us in the foyer and on the road earlier. Thank you all very much, and a very, very big thanks to all of you who have taken the time out to be here joining us this evening, as well as those online. We are very, very grateful. Before I invite the choir to come as we go and get some food, I'd just like us to leave with this thought in mind from one of my icons, Dr. King. He reminds us that hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. So each of us this evening has a choice to make. Will we keep cursing the darkness, or will we become a candle that dispels it? That is my challenge for each of us, and I hope we have benefited. And clearly we have to do this more frequently, Chief Hanson, because the fact is every time we run out of time when people just getting warm up to ask questions, right? So we're going to have to do this maybe twice annually rather than a single time. I think that's needed. And so I'm going to invite the choir to come and sing for us. And the way I'm going to ask us to do this, if the front row and the back row could go to the side room and get some food, then we do the second row and the penultimate row and the third row and so on. Yes, and please feel free to come back in and sit here and have your meals and have the other interactions which were mentioned earlier to keep the conversation going. But again, thank you all very much. I invite the choir to come and sing for us, and please let's go and have some food before we leave. Can we have a round of applause for our choir as they come?
Please leave some food for the choir.
want to